So, I'm going to be reading another story from Antique Fairy Tales. I think this is the fifth story I've read from this book. So, it's called The Hippogriff and the Dragon. I don't actually remember the story, but I know I read it once, but I can't remember what it's about, other than Hippogriff and a Dragon. I'm gonna get some tea really quick. Hope it doesn't fall. Keeping it there. Don't spill my tea. Okay. So, the Hippogriff and the Dragon. Not long ago, there lived in a cave full of dark holes and ugly shadows an old and feeble dragon, who had nobody in the world to take care of him. He was the last of that tribe which once waged terrible war upon mankind, and all his relations and friends had been killed off by this same race of men, who declared that unless they did take such measures, the dragons would not only kill them and their wives and children, but eat them into the bargain. Perhaps this was true, for the dragons had never been accustomed to eat anything but meat, and so they felt actually obliged to supply themselves 2 or 3 times a week with a plump boy or a girl, or a well-seasoned old lady. But all those exciting days were past. Now the last dragon had just enough strength to crawl slowly about, setting snares to catch birds and rabbits for his dinner. So feeble was he that you could scarcely have terrified him more than by inviting him to attack a human being. He was very lonely and unhappy, and would have been far more so except that the cave nearby dwelt a hippogriff, who was in exactly the same circumstances, alone, almost helpless, and the last of his race. The dragons and the hippogriffs had once been deadly enemies, and 2 of the animals meeting in a forest path would have torn each other in pieces without stopping to say good morning. But this pair had suffered so many hardships that they were only too glad to forget old grievances and become intimate friends. One morning the dragon rose early after a miserable night, and when he had breakfasted on a cold crow's wing left from yesterday's dinner, he took his cane and crawled out into the sunshine, hoping to see the hippogriff. Sure enough, there sat his friend, also sunning himself, at the door of his own cave. "Well," said the dragon, "what sort of night have you had?" "Bad, bad," growled the hippogriff. "The fact is, I was too hungry to sleep. We can't stand this much longer. A good half-ox, or a tender young calf, would set us both up, but we are too weak to provide for ourselves. Our days are numbered." "I've been thinking it over in the watches of the night," said the dragon, "and I've come to the conclusion that we'd better go into the nearest village and see if we can't get employment, and so be able to start a little account at the butcher's. I think I could carry stones or bite down trees as soon as I get my strength up, and I know you could sweep out rooms with your tail." "There's only one trouble," said the hippogriff thoughtfully. "As soon as the people saw us coming, they would set upon us and kill us before listening to a word." "Men are not what they once were," said the dragon, shaking his head wisely. "They talk a great deal more than the knights we used to know, and they do a great deal less. Get your stick, my friend, and let us start while we still have strength to crawl along. Trust me, it's the only thing to do." The hippogriff was a little doubtful, but he had the greatest confidence in his friend. The dragon had always believed so firmly in himself, and the hippogriff thought he must have good grounds for doing so, and it would be very silly not to believe him too. So he went in for his stick and gave a farewell look at his cave, and then, taking the dragon's arm, set off down the hill that led to the village. Shall we ever see our homes again?" he murmured in a sad voice after the first half-mile. "Alas, I'm afraid not." "Who cares if we don't?" said the dragon. "If we get other homes, 10 times as good." And as that seemed reasonable, the hippogriff said meekly, "You are quite right," and went stumbling along without further complaint. So there's the dragon and the hippogriff. They do look old. That one especially. I'll get some tea. This tail looks like it's in a knot. That can't be comfortable. All the afternoon long they journeyed, and though faint and hungry, they dared not stop, for fear their strength would desert them utterly. The steeple of the village church seemed hardly nearer than in the morning, and not a soul did they meet or pass upon the way. I could eat a caterpillar with relish, said the Hippogriff at length. Oh, brother, think of the good old days when we should have scorned a caterpillar, except for dessert, after a hearty meal of a knight and his horse. I don't think of the good old days, answered the dragon, still undaunted, though he could scarcely limp along. I have fixed my mind on the good time coming, and there I mean it shall stay. They staggered on until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then, just as they were about to lie down by the roadside in utter despair, the dragon caught sight of something which put new courage into his failing limbs. Stop, he whispered, grasping the Hippogriff's arm. Look over in that field and tell me what you see. The Hippogriff looked. It's a maiden, he answered, sitting under a tree, holding her hand in one of those queer things they call books. We must go over there and talk with her, said the dragon. No doubt she can tell us something about the village people, and we will send her on in advance to announce our intentions. But we must circle about so as to approach her from the back. If she sees us coming, she will be terribly frightened and run, and we couldn't possibly overtake her. They climbed the fence and began cautiously approaching the young woman, who was really so absorbed in reading a Greek play that they were not in the slightest danger of seeing or hearing anything. Only once was the silence broken, and then the Hippogriff ventured timidly. She wouldn't make a bad dinner. Hush, said the wise dragon. That would do very well for today, but what would become of us tomorrow? The village people would turn out in a body and hunt us down. No, I have become a law-abiding citizen. Meanwhile, the young lady sat intently, reading her book, and sometimes consulting other volumes, and when the 2 travelers were within a few feet of her, the dragon gave a delicate cough. She slowly turned her head and saw them. The Hippogriff, trying to look as gentle as possible, laid a claw on his heart and made a low bow, while the dragon gazed at her with a cheerful smile. They both expected her to give a blood-curdling shriek and spring to her feet in terror. It was evident that they knew nothing about this particular kind of young woman. She settled her eyeglasses firmly upon her nose and looked the creatures over. Who are you? She asked in a high, clear tone. Can you talk? This was very confusing to the dragon and Hippogriff. The thought darted through their minds. If a mere girl isn't afraid of us, what can we expect from the village authorities? Oh, yes, ma'am, said the dragon, recovering himself first. We talk and walk and eat when we can get anything. We are not in the least different from other folks, though we may look so. That's why we've made up our minds to move to the village. What are your names? I am a dragon, and my friend here is a hippogriff. A look of joy flitted over the young woman's face. How very interesting, she cried, in a tone of such rapture that the dragon's spirits rose at once. How wonderful that such an experience should be mine. Come, sit down here on the grass and tell me about yourselves. The dragon and the hippogriff were very glad indeed to sit down, and the former especially was well inclined to talk. He began at the beginning of the dragon and hippogriff story, and told all he knew, and all he had ever heard about those remarkable creatures and their warfare with men. When he had finished, his listener drew a breath of delight. This is amazing, said she. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't heard it with my own ears. But what do you think of our chances of being allowed to live in the village, ma'am? Ventured the hippogriff. They never would permit it in the world, she said, wrinkling her brows in thought. The very sight of you would frighten them to death. But you are not frightened, suggested the dragon. She smiled at him loftily. No, but I am an advanced young woman. I have had a college course, and none of the village folk are in the least like me. They would expect you to eat them up. But we would promise not to. urged the Hippogriff, who was actually so hungry that he could not speak of food without tears. But the advanced young woman was thinking so hard that she took no notice of him at all. Sorry. "Ah," cried she at length, in triumph, "I have it. You shall become vegetarians." "I will become anything that is proper, ma'am," said the dragon meekly. "What sort of creatures are they? I shouldn't want to give up my tail and my claws." "You would merely have to give up eating meat, and then of course nobody would be afraid of you. It will be a most interesting experiment. Perhaps we can even modify your teeth and make you graminivorous." This ambition was quite beyond the creature's comprehension, and so they said nothing, but tried to look wise, as people often do who don't understand. "Just over the brow of this hill," added the advanced young woman, "is a cottage my father built for me, for study, so that I might retire there beyond the hearing of the world." She meant the village. "Now you shall go there with me after dark, and I will bring you some supper. You must on no account step outside the door, and tomorrow, immediately after breakfast, I will be with you." Meanwhile, she had packed her books together, and making them into a nice heavy bundle, started away over the hillside, driving the two creatures before her. And although she was both slight and young, they were really quite afraid of her, and went meekly stumbling along, hand in hand. "She seems to take a great interest in us," whispered the Hippogriff, when the advanced young woman was occupied in unlocking the door. "She must think us very remarkable." "Hush," said the dragon solemnly. "There is more in this than we understand." And there was. "There," said the young woman, when she had ushered them into one large room that occupied the entire floor of the cottage. "Now be very quiet and patient. To prevent accidents, I think I'll lock the door on the outside." And this she did before hastening away. When she was fairly gone, the dragon and the Hippogriff looked about them. The room was filled with all sorts of strange articles, which they had never seen or heard of. The walls were lined with books, and on the large table there was an inkstand, an unabridged dictionary, a microscope, a herbarium, an astrolabe, a sextant, and other queer things that used by advanced young women, which I don't in the least understand any more than the dragon and the Hippogriff did. "I don't like this," said the Hippogriff, looking about him. "Nor I," said the dragon, "but let's wait until she comes back and see what will happen." Presently there was a rattling at the door, and it came their hostess, tugging a large pail and looking much excited. "I brought your supper," she said cheerfully. "Oatmeal, far more nutritious than meat." She poured the pudding into 2 large dishes and placed it on the floor before them, and while they tried to eat it and smeared their jaws and burned their tongues, she walked round and round, studying them from every point of view. "Vertebrates," she exclaimed, adding, and she paused beside the dragon, "would it annoy you if I tried to count your vertebrae while you were eating?" "Not at all," said the miserable dragon, though he had no idea what vertebrae were. "I believe I won't take anything more to eat, thank you. Thank you, ma'am." And then the advanced young woman was perfectly happy. She pinched their backbones to see how they were made, counted their claws, and examined their teeth, and the horrible-looking animals were by this time so depressed that they never thought of objecting. "Ah," murmured she, "what a precious privilege, and how Professor Cervix would envy me." It was quite dark before she could tear herself away from them. "Now," said she, at last gathering up the dishes, "take a good night's rest in order to be perfectly fresh in the morning. Then I intend to sketch you." When the sound of her footsteps had quite died away, the Hippogriff looked at the dragon and gave a hollow groan. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I could eat a buffalo, hide and all," owned the dragon frankly. "Still, if one were here, I should try to resist it. If it's possible to become a law-abiding vegetarian, I'm the dragon to do it. I believe myself the stuff she gave us was rank poison," said the melancholy Hippogriff. "I eat very little of it, but I feel extremely queer." Wait till it begins to nourish you, said the hopeful dragon, who felt quite as unsettled as his friend, but had no intention of showing it. Remember, she told us it was far more nutritious than meat, and if that's true, we shall soon begin to feel it in our legs and claws. Now go to sleep, as I shall, and make the best of it. So saying, he curled his head under his shoulder and folded his claws, and was soon far on the road to dragon dreamland. Next morning, the advanced young woman reached the cottage by the time the early birds had begun to charm away the dusk. She brought a steaming kettle of cracked wheat, and this she poured out before the two monsters with so gracious an air that they hadn't the heart to tell her that they hated the sight of it. Instead, they each made her a polite bow, and tried with all their might to force a little down their unwilling throats. The young woman, however, never noticed how hard a time of it they had. She was altogether too busy, first in getting her sketching materials together, and then in drawing the outline of her guests from every point of view. She sketched them sitting, standing, and lying. She sketched their faces, their claws, their tails. Never since time began had there been such an exhaustive study of dragons and hippogriffs. She worked all day long, forgetting to stop for dinner, and the worst of it was, the hippogriff thought she forgot their dinner also, and they languished until nightfall without even a dish of oatmeal. However, when she went home very tired, but with an undaunted resolution still shining on her brow, she left them the cold cracked wheat for supper. That night they did not talk. Their terror of the future was too great. Things went on this way for a week, the dragon and the hippogriff trying to become good vegetarians, and growing weaker every day, their hostess worrying them almost out of their senses by asking them questions about their previous history, and as the hippogriff said, trying to pry into their family affairs. The truth was that she knew this to be a splendid opportunity for studying the habits of animals which most people consider fabulous, and she was determined to make the most of it. Now, said she, on leaving them one night, I hope you'll go to bed early, for I want you to look particularly fresh tomorrow. A dear friend of mine, Professor Cervix, is coming to see... Why? Is coming to see you, though he doesn't in the least suspect you are here. I intend to surprise him, and then we shall consult together about donating you to a museum. What is a museum? Asked the hippogriff feebly. It is a large collection of animals, shut up in cages, said the advanced young woman with cheerfulness. Good night. Don't give yourselves any uneasiness, whatever we decide upon. You need take no responsibility. I will arrange everything. And the worst of it was, they knew she would. For a long time after she was gone, they said nothing at all, but at last the hippogriff remarked solemnly, 100 years ago or more, the fairies danced one night on the green, and we hippogriffs lay in the woods and watched them. They were practicing the vanishing charm. I remember, said the dragon. We dragons were there. We dragons were there too, in the opposite wood. We meant to fall upon you and eat you up, when the fairies were gone, but we got so interested in their vanishing charm that we forgot all about it. Do you remember what they sang? Perfectly, said the hippogriff. Shall we try it? Yes, I don't know where we should be after we had vanished, but nothing could be worse than this. Come, let's begin. It may take a long time. So they sat down in the middle of the room, clasped claws in the vanishing grip, and began a solemn chant. Criss-cross, gain is loss. The gold in the earth is nothing but dross. Hey-ho, who can know, but the elves where the flowers in elfland blow. My tail is gone, said the dragon in an excited whisper. So is my left ear, cried the hippogriff. Come, faster. If you double under as I double over, then lightning is thunder and red top is clover. So turn it about, now slow and now fast, till the end is beginning and middle is last. There go my claws, cried the hippogriff, and my hind legs, said the dragon. Oh, how comfortable I am. I haven't felt so light since I was a baby. They chanted faster and faster. They were wild with joy, and the hippogriff felt his backbone going. He gave an exultant shout to think the advanced young woman would never count this vertebrae again. But this was his last thought in this world. The song was finished. The cottage was silent. The hippogriff and dragon had vanished. Next morning, the advanced young woman went early to her retreat, that she might be sure that 2 animals were prepared, for meeting the learned Professor Cervix. She opened the door and looked in. Not a trace of living creature was to be seen. Even her precious drawings had disappeared, for the dragon had laid one claw on them as he chanted the vanishing words, and they also had felt the charm. But the advanced young woman, though she was disappointed, felt no surprise. "Of course, there's no such thing," said she. "They're nothing but fabulous monsters. I must have dreamed them." But at the very moment the dragon and the hippogriff, young and strong and no larger than butterflies, were telling their adventures to the elf queen, who laughed over them until her poppy throne swayed in the breeze. "Trouble yourselves no further about food and shelter," said she, when they had finished, "for those that lived in this vanished land need no roof to cover them, and honeydew is all their food." That was interesting. I kind of like that one. It's my favorite story I've read so far in this book. Hope you liked it. The Hippogriff and the Dragon.